Africa is a land of striking similarities. The energy in Lagos is as positive as the energy in Johannesburg. The hustle in Nairobi is not so different from that in Yaoundé. The hope in Kigali and that in Accra is cut from the same cloth. From Cairo to Cape Town, Africa is rising. All this infectious positivity coursing through the veins of the motherland is driven by one key population, the youth. But even as they drive economies and shape the future of their countries, young people around the continent are still being locked out of conversations that matter, including their role in protecting the environment. In spite of the immense hurdles put their way, they are not sitting back. In fact, many young people across Africa are standing up to be counted by unashamedly demanding space on the table of decision makers. My name is Daniel Wesangula. I have spent years in newsrooms covering various subjects that define humanity. In a career spanning a decade and a half, I have worked for some of the world's biggest news organizations, finding links between war and drought, between rain and peace. I am now on a journey to have conversations with individuals saving the planet one day at a time. Because quite frankly, this place we call home needs saving. This is Breathe, a podcast series by the Africa Biodiversity Collaborative Group, produced by Distory Communications. In this episode, we speak to Africa's largest age group, the youth. We try to find out what role they have in protecting the broken earth that they will inherit from their parents. Do they think they have what it takes to offer solutions where a majority of those who came before them failed? Do the youth of Africa have the strength to carry the burden of restoring the earth to factory settings? This is a story of Africa's youth and their quest to change the world. Simangele Msweli has worked within the space of youth for years. Her work within the conservation space has seen her not just speak up for the youth, but most importantly, create more room at the table of decision making for this key population. Simangele, who currently works as the Senior Manager for Youth Leadership Program at the African Wildlife Foundation, is quite a big deal within conservation circles. Maybe you can start by telling us who Simangele is.
Thank you so much for inviting me. The name is Simangele Msweli. I come from South Africa, but I'm currently based in Kenya, where I work for the African Wildlife Foundation as Senior Manager of the Youth Leadership Program. But on the question of who I am, I'm a conservationist at heart from a very young age, actually. I've been in the space of conservation since I was about 14 when I joined the school environmental club.
14?
Yep.
Oh my goodness.
I used to be, you see those kids at school who after school they pick up the litter and everyone thinks you're trying to be bougie?
You were that kid.
I used to be part of that gang.
Oh my goodness.
That does that, yes.
Simangele is not the only one who believes the young generation can offer the much needed change and agency into conservation.
My name is Sengweru Winnie, a young woman, a young girl, and a mother from the Sengwer indigenous community. So I work at the National Coalition of Human Rights Defenders as an advocacy officer, but also I am very passionate about indigenous people's way of life, and so I also coordinate a partnership between the Defenders Coalition and indigenous people.
As I speak to her, I sense a mix of anger and disappointment in her voice. Angry that the solutions are not being rolled out fast enough, and disappointment that those to whom age-old conservation knowledge was passed on to are not being given the opportunity to pass on this wisdom to the young.
Growing up, I never experienced prolonged droughts. I never experienced landslides. I never experienced flash floods because these guys knew how to take care of the environment. So what needs to be done is to ensure that there is intergenerational knowledge transfer between these people that came before us, the previous generations, the current generations, and the future generations. Knowledge is flowing from one generation to another.
Her emotions are justified. The United Nations Climate Action says climate change has increased the levels of uncertainty about the future for the youth, and that they are increasingly aware of the challenges and risks presented by the climate crisis.
So growing up, I realized my passion is to take care of the environment. So I've been very active in networks that do environmental conservation, that ensures that there's biodiversity conservation, because as indigenous people, we are alive to the fact that our lands and our homes protect 80% of the world's biodiversity. So yeah, why not take care of the environment? The world needs us. Everyone depends on indigenous people.
So, for the more than 1.8 billion young people aged between 18 and 24 years around the world, this crisis of conscience by the older generations presents not just a problem, but an opportunity to offer solutions as well. And in these numbers, the youth can find strength. Strength by organizing their thoughts and energies into a cohesive voice that will be listened to.
Yeah, it's been complicated, but there's been some positives. So I'm currently in the steering committee of the Global Youth Biodiversity Network. It's a youth network that is the official constituency in the CBD. If I look back 5-6 years ago, we never used to have chapters in Africa, organizations in Africa. So you didn't have youth that were permanently or consistently engaging with the CBD focal points in their countries. Until in 2016, where after attending this international conference, me and another colleague from Madagascar and the leaders of the global network were like, you know what, let's bring this workshop to Africa for youth to learn how the CBD works, and we connect them with policymakers. Right now, starting from that workshop in South Africa in 2016, we have given chapters in 20 African countries. Some of them already registered as NPOs and legally operating. And it all came from that idea, and they work closely with their governments. I'll use South Africa as a case study, because after that conference, I then, with a group of colleagues, co-founded the South African Youth Biodiversity Network. When there's been negotiations on the post-2020, it's been the group where the focal point of the CBD actually contacts that group to say, we are doing this, can you help us with consultations with youth? In 2019, when negotiations on the post-2020 were still new, the government even partnered us with the network to support us to do consultation meetings in 6 different provinces in South Africa, so that we can do a report that feeds into their processes. So it is slow, but there's been leaders that are key to listen, who've embraced the idea of youth that are engaging.
There is a nobility and purpose in the work of individuals such as Winnie. The reality, though, is that for decades, decision makers in her world are not in her age bracket and may not resonate with the change she is effecting. But she has hope.
I don't think people trust us enough, but I've always tell myself, probably these guys should take a risk and say, why not allow them to lead? Why can't we see a 30-year-old being standing up for presidency, or a 35-year-old? Because we want people who are informed and people who understand what the environment needs to be in leadership positions, to be in decision makings. But the challenge comes is that these opportunities are very limited.
But is being young enough to earn you a seat at the decision makers table? I asked another young conservationist, Peter Moll, about this. His answer is both a yes and a no.
To be honest, let me tell you one thing very serious and very close to my heart. The people in power know already. They have enough advisors and scientists and all the information they need. Right now, as young people, especially African youth, we need to be positioned to play a role. Kelele, we don't need noise. They know. We need action. We need young people, especially African youth, to be positioned from co-creation to co-planning to co-implementation to co-management to benefit sharing. Put us at the table, put us on the ground, let's get to work. We're here to play a role in terms of how we can implement. In terms of the European, they need to raise their voice because they don't have much nature. They can't do much, to be honest. But us, we can do much. We are the last frontier. Africa, we are rich in our biodiversity. So we as youth in Africa, cool, raise awareness, I also raise awareness. But for us, what we need, not to shout, but to be part of the solution.
Peter heads a youth conservation organization called Stand Up and Shout Out, in short, SUSO. It advocates for the youth voices in conservation. He says, as long as the youth are brave to take on some of the hardest truths in their journeys, they'll be fine, including being non-confrontational.
How you get on the table through policy, through action, through capacity, through evidence of your work. Young people need to realize that governments don't want you to tell them what they're doing wrong. Governments want to show you how you can solve it. Governments don't want you to ask them for money. Governments want to show you how can we make money together, or how can we source funding to do what we can do. It's unfortunate, but it's the reality.
There is a certain exuberance to youth, but behind the positive energy is also a vulnerability, a certain fear, and Winnie knows her fears all too well.
My biggest fear. What's my biggest fear? I think my biggest fear is waking up to a world where there is no forest, or waking up to no rain or too much rain. You see, I'm just scared of the impact of climate change, and we see the environment bleeding, and there is no biodiversity. We reduce from 80% to like 50%. So I think that's my biggest fear.
And Peter too has his own fears.
My biggest fear is my sacrifices not bearing fruit. Many people don't realize that the journey you take for your dreams and goals demand sacrifice from you. And I feel I sacrifice so much. I just continue to pray every sacrifice I do bears fruit, and that I don't lose strength along the way from sacrificing too much.
It is no doubt that the youth are the generation most threatened by climate change. Yet, their participation in efforts to raise awareness on the impacts of climate change in some of the most vulnerable countries is still insufficient. They remain greatly underrepresented. Their voices are seldom heard. The solutions they propose are often dismissed by governments with little regard to the future, even though intergenerational equity was a key pillar in the Paris Agreement that took note of intergenerational exchange as an effective way of solving challenges. In Africa in particular, the land on which conservation should and must be practiced most is still out of reach for many youth. Ownership remains with the older generation.
They say in the community structures we are not represented. In some of them we are not even allowed to come in. Yeah. And if you are youth and you are a woman, it's even worse. So you will never get to contribute into them. But in the ones where we are working closely with the leadership structures in order to motivate to them why it's important to include youth. Because one of the things that are very important is you have these community-owned areas or projects. The father grows old. Once, unfortunately, he passes on, which is nature for all of us, no one is there to take over the project because they were never given the space to learn, to be groomed and be part of decision making. And that kind of knowledge is important to start sharing with the older leaders so that they see that empowering youth is not about taking power away from them, but it's about continuing the legacy, basically. Exactly. So it's making sure that them as the elders, whatever great work that they're doing that is benefiting them and the community does not end when their time ends, basically.
As a father of 3, I sometimes ask myself what kind of world my children will inherit. What will we have taken away from them? What will their futures look like in the face of all the damage that our actions are causing to the planet? Will my daughters blame me for sitting back when all this damage was happening? Will my son blame me for not being bold enough to speak truth to power? Speaking to Simangele, Peter and Winnie left me with no doubt that the youth have what it takes to lead us back on track. They have the passion, they have the ideas, they have the energy. All they want from the older generation is a seat at the table of decision making.